Hey everyone, I'm Clayfect, and it's time for another Tutootsie. In this tutorial series, I take the base that we made in the very first episode and turn it into a character. If you want to follow along on this tutorial and haven't seen the very first video, then I would highly recommend you doing that first. There's a link down in the description below. And for everyone else who are up to speed, let's just get started. So as I said, we are starting with the Tutootsies base. This time we are going to make it into an angry little dinosaur bird thing called Maddie. But to become an angry little bird, little Maddie needs his beak, which is why I'm shaping a mix between a cone and a pyramid shape that are going to blend into the base head before I even try to do anything with cheeks. And just like that, we have a beak. But remember, we want little Maddie to look as angry as possible, which is why we're going to cut the beak up and open it so it looks like it is screaming. Now, for most of the blending and the shaping in, I'm using a round rubber shaper tool, but other times I also are using my spoon tool to shape up the beak and get the job done. When we finally get little Maddie to scream, I take out my spoon tool and start shaping inside the mouth, pressing down to make it look like a beak. Now, it can be sort of tricky to make the inside of the mouth, but just stick with it and it's going to look great at some point. After the mouth, I am taking a ball of clay, cutting it up before I place them as cheeks on a little bird. Now I want little Maddie to be furious, so I'm trying to match the cheeks on where the beak is positioned and not raise them up too high because she's going to look angry. Though at this point I will admit she looks more deliriously happy than angry, but that's when the eyelids come in. I take a little snake of clay and trace it all around the edge of the pre-baked eye, making it as open as possible at the top, but at the bottom. On the lower eyelid, however, we are going to make it just as long as the upper eyelid, but we are going to tilt it a bit, making the bird look very angry and demonic when we blend it in. Now for details on the beak, I take a little snake of clay and put it around the top of the beak before I blend it in. And I do that to make a fold, really to push that it's angry and it's screaming at you vibe through. When that is done, I take a pointy thing, it can be anything from a toothpick to a tool that I'm using here, and press in the nostrils before I draw out the line of the beak. And with the beak pretty defined, all we have to do is make a little tongue for it. I do that by making a little clay triangle that I press in with my dentist tool. Now for the eyebrows. This is the thing that's really going to make it look furious. I take a larger snake of clay that I pressed a little so it's flattened before I shape it in a V shape. I make the eyebrows a little longer than I normally would, simply again to make it look very angry before I start blending it all in. I also press in some lines between the eyebrows after I've blended them, simply to again emphasize that this bird is angry and screaming. With the face pretty much done, I begin to make small cone shapes that is going to be pre-baked. I make the different size because I want some spine spikes along our little chick's backs, but it also going to need nails and it's pretty much the same shape, so I pre-bake them in one go. Now while the nails are baking, I'm starting to shape out his body, starting with the tail that I make out of a lump of clay shaped like a cone that I press onto his buttocks before smoothing it in. And with his little mad rump in place, It is time to make some toes for our little fella. And we're doing that by rolling a tiny snake of clay out that we cut into size before we poke a hole with a tiny bolt stylus in it. When we have poked the hole, we fill it with baking bond before inserting the pre-baked nails we have just made. With that done, we shape it to our liking, pressing some folds into the toes before we place it under the belly of the bird, making the toes stick out. And with his body at a good state, it is time to give him some texture. Rolling a sheet out of clay before I start poking with a straw to make these small circles we are going to use as feathers. Now, how you make these small blobs of clay actually doesn't matter because we're going to shape the feather out anyway, as you see me doing here. The only thing that is important is that it is consistent and it keeps being the same size. Because if there's a size difference, it's something you're going to notice right away when you're looking at the finished project. But that can also be to your advantage, making some body parts stand out, like I'm doing here when I make some bigger circles and therefore bigger feathers that's going to be placed on his little tush. A Tutootsies tush. Now try saying that 5 times fast. Anyway, now with the feathers shaped, all we have to do is place them before we give them a light texture with a whopper shaper tool. Now, I have an affiliate link down in the description below where you can buy all the tools you're going to need plus some clay. And I will get a small percentage from that to help me buy more clay. Now you're going to build the feathers up from the bottom and up. And yes, it is a very tiresome process. That's why I feel sort of relieved when I can start poking the holes in the spine of him. Before I fill that hole with some baking bond, getting ready for his dino spikes. So now all we have to do is press the little spike in before we continue on with the feathers. Now I will admit the feathers is sort of boring and a lot of time consuming. But it is totally worth it. You just gotta be stubborn and keep going. And the result speaks for itself, I think. If you have any problems trying to figure out how to place the feathers around the cheeks and so on, the only real tip I can give you is remember that body mass exists and gravity exists and keep placing it until it looks right to you. So I keep going like that, only using his little wire arms to move him around. But with his head all done, all he has to do is go in for his first bake. Now on the package it says bake it for 15 minutes on 130 degrees Celsius. That is 275 Fahrenheit. But I prefer a bit longer. I bake it at 120 degrees for 25 minutes. That is 248 in Fahrenheit. And I do that simply in the hope of avoiding some of the cracks and also making sure that the clay is fully baked. Now with our little fella baked, it's time to make him some wings. And I do that by rolling out a pretty thick piece of clay that I then cut into size. You see me cutting the first wing and then using that angle and place it over the second wing simply to make them sort of cohesive. So I don't have to go that much back and forth and I can just shape them as I want. Now even though the facial expression is very important, if we want to sell the furious attitude of this little bird, then we also gotta have the body language with us. So that is why when I cut into the clay, I am bending the wing and I pulled the wire sort of backwards to making it look like this little fella is ready to charge us. Though I have to mention, if this figure were bigger and it was a larger project, then this sort of method on putting the wing on would not have worked. Because then we needed to pull the wing out and shape it and it would be a whole thing, guys. But with the wings finally as we want them, all we have to do is give him a set of feathers. Now I gave him slightly larger feathers at the top and at the bottom, just to give him some more pizzazz. But other than that, it was pretty much the same technique as it was with the body. And with his feathers on, it was actually time for his final bake. Though he wasn't quite done yet, he still needed some love from Clayfect. Her video on how she painted him is going to be the last one of this series, so you have to wait for a little while. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to cheat and show the final result. And there we have him. Isn't he just angry? I am so very happy with him. He might even be my favorite, I have to say. But tell me in the comments, what do you think? Do you like him? And could Little Madi entice you to make your own Tutootsie? If you ever do, then please find me on Facebook, Clayfect, because I would love to see it. But at last, it is time for me to say goodbye for now to ya. Unless you click on the square to your right, then you're going to see another little Tutootsie get made. But until then guys, bye!